Hi there, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Cyber Hut. I'm just going to give it a minute or so to allow people to join, and then we will get started with today's content. We're seeing people starting to join today's webinar, so we will make a start. Hi there, welcome to everybody who is joining. My name is Simon Moffatt. I'm founder and research analyst at the Cyber Hut. We've got a fantastic webinar today, looking to really uncover some of the real world threat actors and some of their patterns, which they're using to attack our human and non-human identity world. We'll dive into some introductions and the agenda in a second, but just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started today. We are on Zoom, of course, so everybody is centrally muted, but we do have the Q&A functionality available to us, so please add in your comments and questions as we go through today's material, and we'll try and answer those either in situ, or we will leave a little bit of time at the end of today's webinar to wrap up any questions that we may have. As I mentioned, we are also being recorded today, so that will be available to you after today's event, so you can watch on demand, or you can share with your colleagues and friends as you see fit. Our identity world, hugely important to everything we do, both in the workforce, in the customer and citizen space, for productivity, for security. Vitally important, but it is coming under increased attack, persistent attack from a whole host of different internal and external adversaries. I'm absolutely thrilled to have a real deep dive webinar on some of the fascinating research the guys at Permiso have been putting together over the last year or two. So absolutely thrilled to be here with Ian from Permiso Security. Ian, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing great. Always lovely to be able to talk with you.
Not at all. Every time I love speaking to yourself, Ian, as well. You come out with some real super research from yourself at the labs you've got over there at Permiso. So I guess that was a couple of intros. I've been in identity for a long time at the Cyber Hut, and I've never, I guess, seen it as being as important, but as under attack as it has the last probably 2, 3, 4 years, I guess. And I guess it's the thing is that it's become more important. It has more responsibilities, but it is under both adversarial and, I guess, sometimes accidental sort of insider attack as well. And sort of the role of the cyber, we sort of track a whole host of different sort of emerging uses of identity. And it's fascinating to be able to track the likes of yourselves who are really publishing research and ways we can monitor the human and non-human world. But maybe give a bit of an intro to yourself, Ian, your sort of backstory, and maybe what you're
Sure.
doing at Permiso as well.
Yeah. So again, my name's Ian. I'm the CTO here at Permiso. I've been in the industry roughly 20 years now, so a little bit more. I'm getting up there. And I got my start in the industry in the Marine Corps way back when, just doing basic IT level stuff. I really feel like I gained my sea legs though at Mandiant, and there I was doing IR work for about 10 years. That's where I met our co-founders and co-CEOs, Paul and Jason, on the Permiso side. And when they went to start their identity journey, they asked me to come tag along and build up a research component focused very much on the way I had built my team over at Mandiant, which is know more about the bad guys than anybody else, and then make that actionable for the Permiso clients or Mandiant clients back then. Now just on a different data set, the identity data set rather than that IR data set I was working with previously.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? I think it is a specific thing, isn't it? Now looking at identity-centric attacks. 5, 8, 10 years ago, absolutely we had sort of like endpoint detection or the network detection as it was then before the sort of zero trust world, and you're looking at sort of network indicators of compromise. But now a lot of that's disappeared, and the only consistent factor is the identity and the access and the information path which the identity has, which hopefully we're going to sort of uncover in the next sort of 45 minutes or so. It is subtly different, and some of those attacks are very powerful and very, very insidious. So um, today's agenda, today's topics, a couple of things really. Let's start off a little bit of sort of baselining, really, just to set the scene around. This isn't just a human-led problem. Now, clearly, identity and access management, the foundations were within people-centric identity management for sort of B2E and for workforce, etc. Clearly, that has expanded hugely now to it does include customers and citizens, but it also includes this non-human element as well. Anything from service accounts to sort of APIs or to workloads. I guess more latterly, we've got this rise of agentic AI, which is sort of taking over the world as well. So we have this human and non-human set of identities to cater and manage. And then a little bit of baselining around specific identity risk and threat concepts. Risk management been around for a long time. We have lots of good risk management frameworks, but it's really now applying it to our identity life cycles and looking at sort of uncovering threats to specific parts of the identity data, the runtime, auth see all of the different life cycle stages in there. And then we're going to have a bit of a deep dive into sort of 4 really good real world research sort of case studies ultimately, and hopefully at the end of that we've a few lessons learned, a few maybe not too many scare stories, but a few lessons learned there and how we can start to sort of move ahead and put in place some strategic protection strategies in there as well. But I want to start off a little bit, just set the scene around the sort of world for both human and non-human identity. And I think, identity management for people, it's been around, I want to say 30 years, really. End of the 90s, ultimately, commercial software, things like single sign-on, enterprise single sign-on, LDAPs, directory services, and others, which then clearly is evolved to include PAM and passwordless and just-in-time provisioning, all this sort of stuff. But unfortunately, we're still struggling with human-led identity. Organizations invest in PAM tools, IGA, MFA, and other, but they still have data breaches. They still face insider threats, nation state breaches, and other. And then, of course, the last probably 2, 3, 4 years, we've seen a real upsurge in non-human identity, agentic AI, which it brings a whole host of different challenges. We have volume problems in the sense of there are more identities, more accounts, more credentials, lots of issues around governance, lack of accountability, no single source of truth, if you like, no HR system for NHI, style identities as well, lots of different isolated security patterns. Whether using sort of NHIs in AWS versus Google versus SaaS versus on-prem, very different models around what they are, how they behave, and other. So there's 2 ends of the spectrum, and somehow in the middle, we need to try and join them together. And I guess just bringing you in, Ian, quickly here, are you seeing any specific differences here, or from your perspective, is it simply saying, look, well, it's an account, it's an identity, we don't really have a major differentiator whether it's sort of human or non-human, or are there some sort of subtleties which immediately allow you to sort of look for different things?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely some differences, but the way I almost think about it is like the non-human side. They're like this. That's where like I almost categorize those the credentials more than identities sometimes. Where the human identity, like this is the parent, and they have a bunch of children, which are these non-human identities. There's always a human connection to that NHI side of the house. I think everyone has stats, right? Like there's for every human identity, there's another 16, but or whatever that number happens to be for your organization. But when I think about like even just myself, right? My human identity. Well, I don't even just have one human identity, right? I have my Okta
Yeah.
account, I have an Entra account, I have local access into GitHub, right? Like I have various different identities. But hey, on GitHub, I also have a personal access token. That's my non-human identity aspect. For that EC2 instance that I connect to, I have an SSH key that I would
Mm.
consider that non-human side. Um, and as you can imagine, like there's a lot of sprawl here. So even when you're trying to answer like simple questions like, I need to go offboard Ian. If Jason and Paul ever decide to fire me, good luck
They'll
trying to
never do
fire
that.
me. Like good luck trying to do it because I have
Yeah.
my credentials are so varying. It'd be very hard. Even just answering the question of like outside of just detection, like even answering the question of how many identities do I have? What types
Mm.
of identities I have is a real hard problem for even small organizations to answer. And it only
Mm.
gets bigger with the scale of the organization you are.
And you made an interesting point there. Like Pat's, like personal access tokens. You create that. You're in charge of
Mhm.
that, if you like. So it isn't necessarily coming from an outside system. It's not being triggered. There's no visibility. It's more your identity, whatever. Could be linked to HR, whatever. But then obviously downstream of you're creating things, deleting. Some of it could be perfectly legitimate. Some stuff could be it may not be legitimate. It could be
Sure.
malicious creation, and that's back to that not having that source of truth and that lineage around creation, which then obviously spills into usage as well, doesn't it? The behavior aspect. So there's definitely differences, I think, there, as you mentioned. But I think hopefully if we can do some sort of carbon life form linking at least. So whether it's a credential does exist, at least if we can tie it to Ian, we have something there, an anchor point to say, look, is Ian's behavior looking strange or different or unusual, and is he acting as a vector into those downstream aspects? I think it's probably a good starting point. But as you say, volume, that subtle difference between there isn't necessarily a big account or a big identity profile, a big schema with lots of attributes. It could well be a certificate or a private key or something which is it doesn't necessarily equate to some level of ownership there. So there's definitely subtleties, but I think there is a concern around the creator isn't the maintainer. It isn't necessarily linked to some sort of lineage. I think is can link to some pretty insidious blind spots, as you mentioned there, and not understanding what is out there, what types of non-human identities, the good versus the bad, good behaviors, bad behaviors, baselining, and other, which I think is definitely something I think we as an industry need to be aware of and understand and put in place, at least ask the questions on how this stuff can be managed. And I guess that really sort of seeds into my next little sort of 101 foundation here around thinking about risk and threat around our identity world. And clearly, as identity has moved from being just focused on LDAP and Active Directory and productivity, it's become this really important part of the business. And it does productivity. It allows you to sell more, share more, do more, and all of these different things. But by design, that then becomes an attack point. And we're starting to see some really clever, insidious, well crafted attack patterns across all parts of this identity world. And the one thing I want to sort of amplify a little bit, which is what we sort of get involved in the side quite a lot, is looking at that end to end holistic identity security world, from identity data creation, profiles, permissions, policies. Authentication is obviously a big pinch point, and it's often one organizations stop at. They do MFA and they walk away. It's like, oh well, we've deployed a USB key, and that's it. Well, there's a whole host of things after there: secure session, federation attacks, policy enforcement points, decision points, and other. So it's to me this sort of threat assessment world, or the thinking about identity threat, it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger there. And I guess, just anecdotally, are you seeing organizations think about identity threat as a sort of a separate function, or is it still quite nascent, do you think, within industry?
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. I'm seeing more and more large organizations starting to carve out identity security teams where even like we focus more on detection side on the Permiso platform, back in the day. Who are we selling to? Were we selling to the IAM team? Were we selling to the SOC team? It was different in
Yeah.
different organizations because different people managed that. But overall, I think the large organizations are setting the trend of no, it needs to become its own function with some ownership and probably needs to be directly lined up with the CISO objectives as well, where that hasn't always been where it's landed vertically. And one other
Yeah.
thing, in relation to what you were talking about moment ago is like, yep, some organizations are getting better about that, setting the right configuration, setting that right default configuration. But what I still see a lot of is people not managing the drift from that configuration. So
Yeah.
when a bad guy comes in and has the ability to change them back to weak SMS for off, yeah, you had the default set that they needed to be phone app only. But do you have an alert when somebody changes that default to SMS? Probably not. Those are the things you need to think about on the configuration side too, is not just setting the default, but monitoring the default.
And that's a really good point, isn't it? I think there's a lot of situations where the configuration it's complicated, isn't it? It's subtly complicated in the sense of it is easy to misconfigure. Often when things are working, you sort of step away from it and you don't want to make changes there. And I think absolutely right. There has to be that continuous compliance, or just as you said, looking for looking for changes, looking for things which represent the current risk appetite of the organization, because the risk appetite is going to change, the threat model is going to change. So surely you should be checking the controls that are in place. And I think to me that there are lots and lots and lots of control points now for identity, and it isn't just authn. It is things like session management, session handling, identity data, the runtime behavior, etc., and it is becoming bigger and bigger. And I think the big thing, which I think is the mind shift, I think is certainly starting to occur around. Look, we don't want to wait till an attack has happened and then look at the logs and then try and unpick what's happening. We want to try and sort of detect what's happening in flight and do something, whether it's whatever, stop access or raise a ticket, or just something before the attack has completed. And this is something we did a research report a month or two back, up looking at that attack lifecycle aspect. And the attacks are longer, can be more complicated, not necessarily as easy to spot as you would think. And there are, you talk about the sort of mean time to recovery, mean time detection, all the sort of classic cyber stuff there. But obviously, you want to try and detect the bad stuff before it's happened. Because by the time it's happened, bad guys are long gone, the data's gone, whatever, identity records have gone as well. So I guess back to that sort of enablement aspect. Are these sorts of terms are they becoming common? Do you think in your sort of discussions around looking at that end-to-end sort of attack life cycle and being able to, as you say, work on the CISO's need to detect the bad stuff? Is that becoming more common now? Do you think?
Yeah, I know. I think it's unfortunate for many organizations, but sometimes they need some real life events to occur for that
Yeah,
education.
yeah,
And we've had a couple years of a lot of real life events happening that have impacted major organizations, and it makes them reassess what they're doing. And maybe a bit of a hot take, like detecting something before it happens. Well, you can't detect it before it happens, right? But you could do some things to prevent. But I think everyone's still pretty heavily focused when it comes to identity on like just the access portion, right?
yeah,
Is the access anomalous or weird? That is a part of the story. Also, one of the harder things to actually detect, especially in a modern world where you have residential proxies, you have VPN solutions that your humans, your normal people are using as well as the bad guys. And then on the other side, you have people who are just looking for like the complete mission phase of the attack, right? Like they're looking for when data theft occurs or when ransomware is deployed or whatever that happens. But really, your spot for detecting this is the actions in between. In a world where you can't just look for the bad hash, the bad file name, the bad IP anymore, it's the behaviors of that identity that you really need to look at. So like one of the places I love catching bad guys is in SaaS applications when they're just searching for search terms show intention. If I see Simon searching for AKA in SharePoint, I know he wants some long-lived access keys. Right? I know exactly
Okay.
what they're going for. So looking at those actions, we can start like that's our place. When I look at a scatter spider attack, like a typical one that we come across, 72 hours. Well, man, the first 48 is sitting in your
Mm,
SaaS, learning about your environment before taking action. That's where I want to
mm.
disrupt them, right? I want to disrupt them while they're still learning your environment, not afterwards when they're taking things out of GitHub or whatever the action happens to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe we can get onto this later about the disruption, but disruption to me also seems to be changing. 5, 10 years ago, it was like, well, if we see something strange, we'll just do I don't know, a step up authentication event, or if the person's already authenticated, we'll just terminate their session, and you've got to sit there and go, wow, I need to log in again, reset my credentials, all this stuff. But other disruption techniques now, to me, they seem much more high fidelity, much more fine grained around. You can redirect to a honeypot to observe them more, perhaps, send them to somewhere else to check what they're doing, maybe downgrade sessions or alter things. It seems to be we have more, potentially more disruptive and ways to degrade access. Is that fair?
Oh, definitely more ways to do it. And man, I'll tell you, back in my Mandiant IR days, this was always the like the tough decision to make is when do you cut access? When
Right.
do you remediate? Right? We want to find that sweet spot. You do it too early. You don't know enough about what's going on to be able to really eradicate the event. You do it too late. Well, the attackers completed their mission. You didn't do what you were supposed to do there. So you want to be able to monitor a little bit about what they're doing, how they're accessing the environment, what other identities might be in scope, what types of information are they going after, so that you can effectively eradicate them from the environment when you're ready to pull that trigger. And in order to do that, yeah, it means maybe enabling some increased monitoring, maybe pushing them into some directions that they weren't intending to go originally.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's a tough question, isn't it? It's a difficult time to put, as you say, pull the trigger. And I guess
Yeah.
ultimately, you want to somehow change the policy or the environment or something to prevent, future attacks happening. But to be able to do that, of course, as you say, you need a body of knowledge, don't you? You need indicators of compromise or access permissions or something where you can prevent going forward, which is, I think, it is. It's a difficult thing to do. So I want to push on and really sort of dig into some of your work ultimately, the stuff that you guys have been seeing over the last sort of couple of years, really, and look at some real world research, some real world attacks which have gone on. Some more recently, the sort of sales off stuff, but obviously others like the employee fraud and Scat Spider, real long term complex attacks which are really impacting multiple different sectors there. And I guess Salesloft made the headlines probably about a month or so, I guess, August time ultimately. But obviously, again, as always, this goes back a lot further. But what's your sort of view on this? What you guys have been observing, and what have you sort of learned from what was happening there?
Yeah, the sales loft one is a great one to talk through because we could talk about two things here. Like first, sales loft themselves were compromised in order for tokens to be stolen, and then second, their stolen tokens were then used against clients, victims of sales loft themselves, right? And we actually started learning about this event in early August when a whole bunch of SalesLoft Drift clients were their OAuth tokens were being used to connect into Salesforce and essentially just extract out all the Salesforce case data, which the attacker could then go mine some more credentials through. And one thing to highlight there that I love in this is the attacker has access to roughly 900 organizations' Salesforce instances, and we're talking big organizations here. Yeah, like this is very sensitive data. And what does the attacker want? More credentials, right? Like you're already in the like this really fancy, great set of data, and you just want more credentials. That's all they're going for. Get that credential sprawl. And how are they doing that? Download the case data, locally run Trufflehog and like utilities against that to extract out credentials. And now they can go after the real target, which is Snowflake, AWS, with these credentials they've stolen out of that Salesforce data. But if we look at that timeline, right, August 8th through 18th is when the attacker is doing things in the victim environments in Salesforce. But before that is when SalesLoft Drift themselves were compromised. Um, yeah, it's super interesting so far. But before I get into that infrastructure style compromise, man, this really speaks to what we were actually just talking about, the maintainer of those credentials. When we talk about those OAuth tokens, it's not your organization that was managing those OAuth tokens. It was each individual salesperson would connect Salesforce Drift or SalesLoft Drift into Salesforce themselves. So for your organization, you might not even know you have a salesperson that's using Drift until an incident like this occurs.
Yeah, but as you say, it's visibility, isn't it? Visibility first of all, and then being able to, identify the source or when, who, which employees, and why, and have that chain. But I just want to double click on the credentials thing there, because again, it's another interesting aspect around. Do you think the initial sort of credential harvesting was for this attack and others, or is that part of a initial access broker aspect of saying, look, we can use these or proliferate what we've stolen elsewhere? Do you think?
Yeah, so we're already seeing some of these creds show up in marketplaces
Appear.
online. So it seems to be in that realm. Um, and across our client base, we haven't seen these creds being reused yet. But
Okay.
I expect at a certain point we will. But yes, collection of creds for more proliferation of those credentials, whether it be for selling them or using them on their own. Um, Now, the folks claiming responsibility for this are the same folks that claim to be shiny hunters and claim to have just retired as well. So, um, uh, they're claiming one thing while at the same time, there's very active engagements
Part-time
going
work.
on. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe you're not speaking for all the personas that are involved in here. So, but it's just very
Yeah.
interesting to see that aspect of it. They'll find a way to make money with it if they can, right? And that's financial gain and clout with these groups is really what they're going after. So
And everyone talks about sort of credential theft and so on, especially when if it's looking at things like OAuth or down into the sort of API level. There is it. Credential rotation is the simple answer there. But the flip to that, of course, should you continually rotate credentials, or is it more of a triggered thing in the sense of only really rotate them in situations like this because you do know what's happened, you do know which credentials were impacted, so you can rotate. And I guess more interestingly, if those credentials then start to be reused in the future, you have a bit of a, I guess if you're smart enough, you can see where they're being used ultimately. Is that, or is that a bit too subtle in the sense of, you should just be using short-lived creds and rotate them continually, and the impact of this maybe is not quite severe.
yeah, unfortunately, convenience for you is convenience for the attacker
Okay.
as well, right? And I think that's maybe one of the more pervasive things about identity in general. As we make it
Yeah.
easier for us to interact in all the ways we want to, we're also making it easier for attackers to do so. I think it's naive to think we could get to just short-term creds, though. I think you have a need for these. But I do think, like, when I look at a couple organizations who evaded getting hit in this particular case, what were they doing? Well, they had IP restrictions on that OAuth
Okay.
token, so that OAuth token couldn't be used unless it was coming from a particular address. Well, SalesLoft Drift, when that application is being used, it would always come from a few AWS IPs where SalesLoft actually has their infrastructure. um, if suddenly you start seeing activity from DigitalOcean with these IPs, that should have raised red flags for a lot of people, but it didn't. It
Yeah.
didn't raise red flags, and you could have restricted it to just that ASN or just those IPs previously.
Mhm.
Okta themselves were one of the folks that came out and said, "Hey, we were part of the creds that were stolen, but the attacker couldn't use them You know why? Because we have IP restrictions. You should too, right? So that's another approach to limit your liability a little bit by controlling that access if you have to have a long-lived credential.
Yeah, well, it isn't. It's the simple sort of micro-segmentation aspect, isn't it? Removing or reducing the blast radius, but I guess you need to know the characteristics of what that segmentation looks like, as you say, whether it's a particular IP range or a set of IP addresses. I guess ultimately, it's an interesting one. I think it's a pretty good read. There's some good research on there. Any of the final bits on Sales Loft, or should we move on to the next one?
Well, just one thing I'll call out
Sure,
is
go ahead.
Mandiant did release a little bit of information about their investigation into what happened for SalesLoft themselves, the initial compromise there. And they really allude to a GitHub compromise, uh, GitHub probably leading to getting more creds. Those creds allowing them access into the SalesLoft Drift AWS environment, where they were then able to harvest all those customer OAuth tokens, probably sitting in Secrets Manager or an SSM or another common place like that, maybe Terraform Vault. We don't have details on the specific technologies used, but those are where I would normally expect those types of credentials to be. So just very much in line with what I've seen in the past, where if an attacker is able to get into your cloud infrastructure, and as if you're a vendor, one of the things that they're really looking for quick is getting more creds out of Secrets Manager. Watch for um, mass harvesting of credentials from places like that.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Fair
Yep.
point. Alrighty. Let's skip on to the next one, which is
Great.
another interesting one. Which, from my, we talk about phishing, and everyone's assumes, oh, okay, well, I can read a phishing email. I can tell by a specific domain that's quite wrong. And it's like, hey, yeah, we understand it, and I think that again is another maybe a misconception around things like phishing and social engineering. Is it just the bad guys iterate and they become very, very good at being able to deploy components, apps, tools, websites, emails, whatever, which pass some of the filtering techniques and really play on human led abilities to detect things which they can't. And the other side of the fence, of course, is things like Teams. It's an infrastructure led thing. And by this, I mean, you don't often have a choice. You can't necessarily circumvent particular platforms within an organization. You are using them. See, there's a volume aspect there. There's the phishing side of it there, and it's again, what's your sort of real world view here? What's your take on this one?
Yeah, Teams phishing is one I just don't feel like gets enough credit out there. This is something I would say over the last year, maybe like the second or third most likely method for initial access into an environment has been through Teams phishing or similar tools, like similar collaborative platforms like that. And it's real simple take for the bad guy. They go sign up for their own free Microsoft tenant. So then they'll have that on Microsoft, a domain structure in their name, which helps take advantage of the trust of clients. And then they'll just if you're not familiar with Teams, you can like Skype communicate with other organizations. It's not just for internal. So they'll change their display name to something like help desk, and then they'll send a message to 15, 20 people in your organization pretending to be the help desk, um, do a quick call with them. Right? It's almost like the old schemes that used to go against our grandmothers, back in the day. Like, oh, this is Microsoft support. I'm here. Oh, great. Now it's just
Yeah.
targeting an enterprise, with the end goal being get somebody to deploy a remote management tool like Quick Assist, then through that remote control access, complete their mission, whether that be installing some ransomware, harvesting some more creds, maybe
Mm,
doing both, right? Whatever that mission is, but use Teams phishing as a mechanism for getting somebody to, start a remote management tool that you can then use as your method of delivering whatever payload that you like.
And there's some,
Yeah.
again, some subtle things here, isn't there? And by this, I mean, even if you did think something was a little bit suspicious or unusual, it's having, I think, one is having the sort of nous to observe that, but B, I think also having the accountability or the mechanism to raise alarm. And by this, is there a help desk or is there an instant area you can ping a message to or send something to or say, no, actually, sorry, no, I don't believe you're who you say you are, or I don't want this thing installing, or do you know what I mean? So having the ability to spot something suspicious and then act upon it, I think both of those can be quite easily circumvented by, as you said, a little bit of social engineering, a bit of speed, a bit of, well, I've got a domain, I've got a profile picture. You don't necessarily know all of the IT support personnel, so you don't know who they are, how they behave, what they look like. So I think that is definitely one. And then obviously, if an end user who is busy doing their job has a suspicious incident, like literally, what do they do? And maybe that's a bit unfair, but there's the awareness bit. But I think it's also on the organization side, isn't it, to put in place if you do see something, press this red button or go down this channel or otherwise. So to me, it seems a high reward, I think, for a bad guy because I don't think there's a lot of those mechanisms in place.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you look at who they're targeting within an organization, they're not sending these messages to the IT team, right?
Yeah,
They're sending it to your folks that are likely going to be less technical, maybe don't come across this type of information quite as often. Now, if I wanted to prevent this a little bit, I'd be doing things like, well, in Microsoft Teams, I can have an allow list of domains that are
yeah,
able to communicate with me, right? So I would be doing some things like that. Now, Microsoft, though, I will say, uh, whoever is leading things over there, I've been really impressed lately with some of the turns that they've been taking. And here is one of those areas. They obviously recognize this as a problem. It just as recently as last week, if you're getting a message from somebody externally, it's really apparent that this is an external message, or they're adding some more
okay,
decorators to the chats to really help out. Now, I still have organizations getting tricked by it, so maybe not quite enough yet, but I see them leaning in that right direction pretty
yeah.
heavily. Yeah, and yeah, just been very impressed with them in general.
I think the white listing is good, isn't it? Again, it's back to that issue around, look, you don't have a blacklist or have a whitelist. Only allowing trusted parties. And there could well be, as you said, there could well be third parties from a different domain, external, because they could well be third party, whatever, help desk people. So again, having that whitelisting. And I guess one last question here, I guess, is it mainly large enterprises that have been targeting on this, or is it any size that just happens to use sort of collaboration platforms?
Yeah, so this is where my data bias might get in the way a little bit, because we mostly protect large organizations, right? And
Yeah,
that's where I see a lot of this. I do
yeah,
imagine this is happening in other environments, but I don't have a lot of good data for you there. Um, I would say it's very successful, and oftentimes when I'm collaborating with other Intel platforms and what I'm seeing, there's like, yep, I saw three other organizations that got hit by the
okay.
same thing as well. So it's super widespread, wide scale, and I would imagine it's hitting everybody, not
Different
just
size.
these large orgs. Yeah.
Um, all right, good stuff, good stuff. Well, the next one intrigues me hugely, and this is one again which has been going on for quite a while. And when I first started reading up on some sort of employee fraud stuff, probably about 18 months ago, I guess. You sort of read it and you think, nah, this is crazy. And sort of the backstory here is, looking at essentially having fake employees ultimately, isn't it? In the sense of somebody may onboard themselves as an entity, but the person doing the work may not be the same person. And you think, how can that possibly be? That again, that disconnect, that end-to-end disconnect between sort of onboarding, identity profiling, but then the usage behaviors are just entirely out of sync here. And I think it's become a bit of a I hate to say pandemic, but it seems to proliferate. I think once you start to look into this and the sort of the types of organizations, and again, originally in my head it would be, maybe in really large organizations in teams which perhaps span geographic locations, or maybe have sort of project areas where there's different people, different areas. But I don't think that's the case. I think this can be, again, hitting the mid-sized enterprises as well. But over to yourself, what have you seen on this one?
Yeah, I've yet to talk to an organization that once we share some intel with them, or bring them into platform, we can't find some evidence of this at least being
Yeah,
attempted. Right? It's
yeah,
so
yeah,
much. It's almost a ridiculously amount of this going on. Now, for every 100, 200 resumes that hit your organization, how many are making it through that process? Very small amount. But man, if you look at these HR platforms, and you could quickly carve out hundreds of DPRK folks applying for jobs across many organizations, and the goal for them, you know, kind of twofold really. Sanctions evasions is one, right? Like, hey, they want to make money, for the nation state themselves,
yeah,
but also now they're a sleeper in your org that can further the goal of the DPRK themselves, right? And so they could further those goals now that they're there. But yeah,
as
I've
you
yet
say,
to
it's,
talk to an org. Go ahead, sorry.
you just need that one.
Yeah.
You just need that one employee, don't you? Really, you may apply
Hmm.
whatever 2 times. The one employee is in there, and if they whatever become a sleeper, that essentially allows them to. It's like privilege escalation plus plus, because it's not necessarily doing it under the hood because they're an employee essentially, so they have
Yep.
full visibility, access, and recon, and that whole gambit of access to things. And that to me is that's a really difficult thing to try and unpick, isn't it? Because it isn't necessarily a hack initially; it's a hiring initially. So there's a lot of, I guess, assumptions around how you would detect and how you would respond. Are slightly off key, aren't they? They're slightly different because it's not
Yeah.
a bad guy attacking. It's well, what looks like an employee, so you have to treat that almost like an insider threat sort of scenario, which is, I think, a subtly different use case, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually how I often refer to it. I'm like, this is the external internal threat,
Yeah, yeah,
that you have to deal with because you attack the problem almost the same way. But oftentimes, like even a few organizations where we found this, you talk to the folks that are there, and they're like, hey, this is my best employee. Like this
yeah,
person's doing great work. Like it's almost hard for even them to wrap their heads around some of the dangers there, as well. Um, yeah, but it's super interesting. And when we talk about how do we actually find these guys, I think what most people talk about is like the Astro VPN stuff. Like there's a particular VPN software and platforms that they like to use. Cool. There's particular KVM over IP solutions that they like to use. Cool. But the way I like to looking for it is actually the same way I look for any other insider threat is, man, somebody who has ill intent. I know based off of what they're searching and what they're viewing very often. So a lot of the times, they still really want a lot of crypto. So they'll be searching for crypto related terms, or an odd one. They have this fixation with minion related stuff. So if I see somebody
okay,
searching for like fan fiction related to minion stuff, I'm like, oh, all right, let's add that person to the list to go knock on the door on and see what's going on. But
yeah.
yeah, I look for the DPRK stuff like I look for almost any other insider threat. It's the actions within the environment, not just how they're accessing the environment. And most of the time, it's actions in things like SharePoint, that you gain the most insight into what are the intentions of a person.
Yeah, yeah, it's no, it's interesting, that intent thing. I think it's often overlooked. You have the attribution side, which is more saying, look, well, we've onboarded somebody on identity securely, we've done verification and validation, so we know it's definitely Simon, and then things stop, and it's like, well, okay, what about the intent? Malicious and otherwise, accidental, intentional, internal, external. What is the intent of my, as you say, searching for minion stuff or whatever? And you
Right.
then wrap that in the motive and the opportunity. I think once you then start putting some assumptions there and saying, well, there's a motive because we think this, and there's a set of opportunities here. Suddenly, you can gather that evidence, can't you, and then start saying, "Look, actually, yeah, this behaviour is looking slightly strange." But I guess on the sort of countermeasures point there, are we looking at, I guess, clearly better onboarding potentially, but then is it that onboarding and, as you said, looking at end to end the behaviors, the usage? It isn't just particular indicators of compromise or tools. It seems to be more about those subtle changes in behavior. Are they patternable? Are they designing patterns there, or is it something more subtle we need to keep an eye on?
For sure. Yeah, and definitely onboarding needs to strengthen for many of these organizations. Oftentimes it's something as simple as the place the person has on their employee form is not the place they just had their laptop sent to. Like that
Right.
could be enough to like throw some red flags if you're looking at that kind of information.
Yeah.
But going through the whole like real verification process, super important. But regardless of how they get in, I still want to be able to detect the actions that they're
Yeah.
doing, right? And it's particularly with unrelated to the DPRK with regular insider threat. If we look at like the deal rippling stuff going on, how were they finding that the insider there? It was all search terms in SaaS applications, and particularly in Slack in that case. But it was all about monitoring the intentions of a person and maybe doing a little bit of
Yeah.
cohort analysis to see how they differ from other people that are in that same position.
Yeah, peer analysis, absolutely right. I think as
Yeah,
well, it's taking the onboarding and making whatever information you have during onboarding, it's making that available during authentication and authorization, isn't it? It isn't just like a one-off thing, like we've done now, and then when it comes to the authn, it's entirely abstracted. And I think it's really taking the IDV biometry maybe as well and tying it into the authentication. So there's a again back to
yeah,
lineage there, and then as you said, when you're looking activity authorization, you can then wrap that in a bit more context, I think, which certainly provides a bit more informed decision making. But again, another one, I don't think this is solved. I think this is going to run and run and run. I think there's going to be lots of organizations here, and I think, as you say, it's quite a insidious thing to think about. And again, the external insider, that's a really difficult. It's like almost a double negative there to
for
try and
sure.
identify. Alrighty.
For sure.
Last sort of case study ultimately is Scattered Spider. It's been around the block for a bit. I know you guys came out with some really good early research on this when it did sort of come to light. Bit of an update here. What's been happening sort of more recently?
Yeah, yeah. I know you guys are probably as sick as to death of hearing about Scatter Spider as I am at this point. And hey, we did hear earlier this week that maybe they're retiring. Again, we're still seeing active engagement, so I kind of doubt that.
Yeah,
But we can all hope maybe they
they're like
go
boxers,
off.
aren't they? They're like boxers who retire and they come back for another big
Right.
payoff, don't they?
That's right. Tyson's back at it again. Um,
Well, yeah, exactly.
I figure it is worth a quick update on what's different now than 2 years ago, 1 year ago in their behaviors. And I'll just highlight a few things here. One is the industry shifting. They've always focused, vertical at a time, right? We're going to go after hospitality, then we're going to go after retail, then gaming, whatever it is. And that continues. Like we still see that vertical shifting. But it used to be spend a couple months in those verticals. Now it's spend a couple weeks before moving on. So it's just really interesting to see the speed of that. And then why even hang out in a vertical at all? Well, all these organizations with their peers have connections between them. They're often using similar software. They're often have similar types of data. Sometimes they're even partners, right? And maybe you'll find in Secrets Manager a VPN connection string to one of these other guys as well, right? So hang out in the vertical because you're learning a lot about how to operate within a vertical, and you can use that moving forward. Um, Other interesting things is don't see any phishing with these guys anymore.
Okay.
Like just no phishing at all. It's just directly going after the help desk. And one interesting thing here, Simon, is we see them do self-service password reset, particularly in Microsoft environments. They do self-service password reset, but not like complete it, just start it. And why are they doing that? Well, if you go in to self-service password reset right now for anybody that if it has a Microsoft account, type in their email address. What will you find? You'll find it lists out what authentication methods they have available. Right, and this is without
Okay.
anybody, right? So now you already know that, oh, they do have SMS, they have a phone, right? Whatever the options are. And if they have SMS or phone listed as an option, when you click into it, it gives you the last two digits of the person's phone number. So now when they call the help desk 5 minutes later, they can say, "Hey, my name's Ian. I just dropped my phone. It's the one with the last two digits of this. It just dropped it in the water. I need to reset my phone. So I'm going to need a new password and new MFA. Like, help me out, right?" So um,
Yeah.
just it's just very interesting to see how successful that is. In
Yeah.
almost all the recent cases, CFO is the original target.
Okay.
Don't
Yeah.
actually really even understand why. Maybe they just want to keep an eye on how the ransom payments are looking from that perspective. Uh, but it's really high level IT that they focus on after that, on that side of the house. And let's see, a couple other last ones.
Yeah.
Uh, Cloud to on-prem. The
Mm.
focus seems to be just get on-prem as fast as possible. And in certain
Okay.
cases, we're doing remediation in the cloud side. The attacker's still on-prem and they're taking advantage of things like AD sync. Like, oh, they'll change the password down here. Now the password's reset back in cloud because it's synced over. They
Okay.
can
Yeah.
come back. Yep. And then a huge amount of Snowflake skill increase as well, which I think we can attribute mostly to probably leveraging ChatGPT or similar technology to help them get to the data they need a lot better than they used to in places like Snowflake. Yes.
It's fascinating stuff. I mean, I think obviously AI is, as you say, maybe helping there, but it's the iteration thing for me. It's as you say, iterating the attack, iterating the target. The SSPR thing, it's really subtle. That, it's a really clever, subtle thing to do. But
Yep.
combination of recon, a bit of username or sort of MFA enumeration, but then, as you say, subtly applying that in almost a social engineering attack. Speed. Urgent. I've lost my phone. Here's some information to sort of give you the credentials of who I am. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I think again, continually iterating. It isn't just well, we know it, we see it, we can block it or remediate it. It's just going to keep moving, like any virus. Ultimately, it does keep evolving and changing. I think that is the aspect to it, and I think, as you said, maybe they are leveraging AI in some aspects to rapidly focus and iterate on certain parts there. But again, another one I think which will run and run and run. I don't think this is one which is fixed. And again, big aspects there around social engineering, phishing, enumeration, on all part of that identity sort of information flow
For sure.
in there as well. Um, Ian, it's fascinating. Now, unfortunately, we've blasted through 53 minutes here. We can certainly go through all of those in a bit of detail, but I do want to wrap up maybe sort of 5 minutes or just to sort of how we can help some of this stuff. And obviously, we need to understand what we have. And I think you mentioned this right at the beginning around NHI.
Great.
Organizations need to know what they have, and it's easier said than done. I think ultimately identity is fragmented, it's isolated, disconnected, all these sorts of things. Look at the risk aspect, and obviously then do some sort of looking at things like behavior monitoring, peer analysis. So is my behavior changing over time, but how does my behavior compare to yourself, for example? So looking at that peer analysis. But I guess over to yourself, how is sort of Permiso, I guess, helping in giving some of those sort of capabilities out in the real world? Because obviously you've done a lot of research here over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. You're working with some big clients, pulling in some big data sets, and really adding huge value here. So I guess, are some of these attacks, can we beat the bad guys ultimately?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something that everyone needs to pay attention to first, which is that discovery portion. You need to know who your identities are, what credentials they have, what they can access. And there's a lot of like, what can they access? What permissions do they have? But I think the more interesting part of that discovery part is, what do they do? What
Yeah,
actions do they take? What data do they touch? And can you label your identities for that? Right. So one of the things we are doing a lot recently is like, I want to know who my AI users are, my
yeah,
AI builders, who my AI agents are. Well, how do I know that? Well, sure, if somebody has federated access to ChatGPT, you can assume, yep, they're a they are an AI user. But there's way better ways from the runtime perspective to know that. If I see cursor of launch, okay, they're an AI
yeah,
user. If I see them uploading a document to ChatGPT, that's another way to do it. Oh, and they don't have federated access to ChatGPT. That's somebody who's doing shadow AI stuff, right? So
yeah,
like the more you can label an identity based on their behaviors, the more you can start asking questions that align with your risk profile. And then same thing on the risk profile side. It's just like applying our perspective all the time to these common problems, which is identity attribution and runtime. How can I do this
yeah,
better with runtime information? If we look at
mm,
that, the same one, like uploading documents to ChatGPT, do you want to know, who are your identities that consistently upload DLP labeled sensitive documents to ChatGPT or DeepSeek?
yeah,
Cool, great. Now, if that's a problem you have, there's runtime ways to address that, very much like you would almost address any detection problem you have. But then when it boils down to the detection side, it just, when we talk about identity security, it can't stop at your IDP. You have to be looking
yeah,
at what actions they're taking in all the places that an identity can take an action, which is everywhere.
yeah,
Like really tie that identity attribution back and map what you know to the actual attacker TTPs. Like we see what attackers there's enough public knowledge now of what attackers are doing, that you can really start to, comprehensively start saying, hey, when somebody searches for password 5 times, and then downloads a repo in GitHub, or whatever those set of TTP actions are for you, like tie these things together across those environments to handle detection. Don't get stuck in that kind of single event detection world.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely super advice. You mentioned sort of TTPs there, sort of MITRE ATT&CK and things. You know, they can constantly change, but I think the good thing from my point of view is it allows you to be targeted as well. You talk about sort of mighty defend there, where you are doing a sort of threat informed defense. Essentially, you can't
Right.
defend everything. You try and defend against all four of those attacks simultaneously. You're going to be exhausted resource wise and controls wise. So work out which of the TTPs or which of the threat groups and threat actors are targeting you if you don't know. And again, always trying to sharpen the pencil, narrow it down. I think a lot of that does go back to that risk exposure. What is happening? What sector are you in? What are your identities doing? What is the likelihood that whatever the DPRK are going to be doing some stuff or scat spider if you don't know? And then, as you said, focusing TTPs down and you can't do everything, can you? You can't sort of protect everything all the time, which I think is often a mistake organizations start to make. And I guess we're wrapping up rapidly, last sort of minute or two. Any questions from the audience is now the time to do so. I guess my last quick question is, what's next? Is there something coming along? You mentioned AI a little bit there around, we have shadow AI and bad guys are obviously using AI as well. But are we starting to see any seeds of emergent attacks using uh, AI infiltration there, data set pollution? We know about prompt injection. Anything really, really unusual starting to emerge, or is it still bubbling on a few different things?
Yeah, hypothetically, there's so much that could be going, but what do we still really just see? It's kind of the basic stuff still. Like it's still like hijacking your AI infrastructure to power attacker AI goals, right? That is still one of the like major like real life threat actor applications of AI stuff. Now, Anthropic and OpenAI, a lot of research coming from both of them talking about how their products are being used by bad guys to
Yeah.
enable various goals that they're going after. But that's almost kind of like a different subset. I don't consider like those types of things like kind of like what should I be worried about from the enterprise AI usage side. Um, but real life, bad guys trying to hijack your LLM infrastructure is what we see the most of. And then second one is just overall misuse of AI stuff, right? Like the one I mentioned, this one that just keeps coming up, and people uploading documents that your org doesn't want to go to places they don't want it to go
That's right.
to, like
Yeah.
pretty consistently. Um, yeah, one other weird one there, Simon, is we're a big detection platform, and not just detection, but that's our core thing. And sometimes these organizations are asking us to help them measure AI adoption, like
Okay.
positive AI adoption,
Okay.
as
Okay.
well, right?
Okay.
Like who is using and how often are they using? So I think the discovery aspect of AI is probably where most organizations still are, like trying to understand what they even have and which direction it's going.
You can't protect what you can't see. It's a classic
Yeah.
thing, and I think as long as you understand what your infrastructure and your identity world looks like, map that with the things of value that you want to protect, and you can't protect from uncertainty unless you can see what you have. Ian, absolutely fantastic meander there through some real threats to our identity worlds. A few calls to action there to our audience there, and reach out to Permiso, look at the P0 Research Labs blog. There's some really great content articles there, which you guys do promote some really good just ways of thinking as well, not just the sort of the TTPs and the indicators of compromise, but just how to think holistically about some of these threats. I think unfortunately they aren't going away. I think they just seem to be proliferating, and more attacks, more types of attacks. Even when we sort of name the sort of campaign actors there, they don't doesn't stop, does it? They will continue to iterate and evolve. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, both on the detection side and attribution and identity data and all the different components that pull together. But Ian, thank you for taking some time out to share some of that research. Absolutely fantastic as always to learn about that. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. This has been another webinar brought to you by the Cyberhood. This has been recorded, so you can watch it on demand. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.